Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. Our guest today is Jon Bickley, CEO of Anthem Publishing, based in the beautiful city of Bath. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Acorn Web Offset, the Yorkshire-based specialist A5 and A4 magazine printer. With high-speed web offset and sheet-fed printing, together with in-house saddle stitching, perfect binding and mailing services, Acorn can cope with the most demanding of production turnarounds. Acorn prides itself on its efficiency and low-cost print production. For more information, visit acornweb.co.uk. So, Jon, can we begin by you giving us a brief overview of your career in publishing so far?
Yeah, sure, Ciar. I started working in publishing in Komak, magazine distribution, back in the early 90s. I'd sort of had an urge to be a journalist at one point, and then I did a business degree and was moving more towards marketing. So Komak described themselves as a magazine marketing company, so it sounded like the ideal way to get into the worlds of publishing.
And what insights did that route into publishing, starting out working at Komak, give you?
It was brilliant, really. Yeah, they were dealing with so many different publishers on a day-to-day basis, and the whole gamut of magazines. I remember at Komak, every time there was a new special or a launch, you used to get a copy of it for all sort of 200 people in the company. Everyone would get one. So you were just getting this massive range of creativity landing on your desk pretty much every day. So it was a fascinating way of understanding the world of magazines.
And do you think that gives you an advantage now, having an insight into the commercial arm of publishing?
Yeah, I think running a business is a difficult and a ruthless thing. So having commercial sensibilities is essential. Having that background, I think, has stood me in good stead. But obviously, it's all about the different ranges of skills that people bring to a publishing group or company. So, while it's a strength for me in terms of distribution, I've probably got blind spots, when it comes to subscriptions or even advertising sales. So, I think it's always important to surround yourself with people who are experts at the other stuff as well.
So then you went on to work for Future Publishing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I come from Devon, and I always thought I'd end up moving to the West Country. But sort of 2 years into my career wasn't quite what I imagined. But it was such a good opportunity, and Future were just pulling up trees with the way they were growing and just innovating all the time. It was an exciting opportunity, and I sort of brought my future wife down to have a look around, and she said, "Oh, that's nice," and then was quite surprised when we actually moved. It's close enough to London to not be too disruptive for her. But Future itself was just such an exhilarating place. There were launches all the time, and magazines that were selling hundreds of thousands of copies. In just like Amiga format would sell 140,000 copies, and it was an exciting time. There was always something new, and you got lots of responsibility very quickly. So it was a real fast growing up experience.
And what was your first role there?
So I was a circulation manager, working for Jane Ingham, I think, maybe even Greg Ingham back then, looking after PC leisure magazines. So PC format was sort of games and creativity, and this was even before the internet as well. And also, like I say, some of the computer games magazines, Amiga Power. So it was all sort of a little bit, not early days with computer games, but just as they were starting to become mainstream. And it was a fascinating time.
And how did you move up through the company from that first role as circulation manager?
Well, I actually left briefly to try and create a business and seek my fortune, which didn't work out at all well. So I came back with my tail between my legs, but managed to get a role as an assistant publisher, working again on those PC magazines. And I picked up a magazine called Computer Arts, which had just had one test issue, and was able to run with that. And sort of make that my own, if you like. And that was a real success and spawned some other sort of creative computing titles as well. And really, I built from there. Go on.
Well, no, carry on, because I was going to come on to 2002 when you set up Anthem Publishing, but I wanted to ask how the move from Future to setting up Anthem Publishing came about.
Sure. So I was at Future for another 7 years, I guess. And over time, I moved from the computing side to music and cycling and entertainment. So I sort of broadened my experience quite a lot there. And in particular with music, I found a sort of a new home, and I really enjoyed that market. But Future, having been through all that sort of explosive growth and the flotation back in, I think, 1999 or 98, sort of fell victim to the dot-com bubble bursting. And I was basically on the sort of wrong end of a reorganisation. And I was still working there, but I just was a little bit sidelined and wasn't enjoying it anymore. So I managed to sort of agree with them that I'd leave. And there wasn't a lot of choice around Bath at that time if you wanted to be in publishing. And I didn't really want to go back to London. So really the motivation to launch Future Anthem was partly about self-interest of wanting to do publishing and wanting to stay in Bath. But also, both Paul and I had talked about setting up a company, in the sort of previous year, and felt that we could do something successfully and perhaps slightly differently, and also with a much sort of closer focus, because obviously Future was growing and sprawling. So it was a different sort of scenario.
So what was your founding mission?
It was to create great magazines in collaboration with our markets. I think we felt that perhaps some publishers were a bit arrogant and would be quite, back in those days, publishers had quite a powerful relationship with advertisers, and possibly sometimes overexerted that. And we felt that we had an opportunity to work more closely with our markets. And the name Anthem was, although it sort of coincided with us launching a music title, also was meant to be a sort of about doing things together, all in sort of harmony, if you like.
So that was quite forward-looking, because that's very much the ethos of publishing today, isn't it?
Yeah, I think over time there's very much more collaborative approach to publishing these days. It's essential, really, and everyone knows that they've got sort of common aims, and there's a lot less belligerence than there perhaps was back in those days with rate negotiations and the like.
If you were to give advice to anyone considering launching their own independent publishing company today, what would be the do's and don'ts?
I would, like I just did, take a deep breath first. I think it depends what you mean by a publishing company now. So one of my good friends at Future, James Binns, he launched a publishing business, but it's not a print publishing one. It's an online games network, and being spectacularly successful. The inclination of launching a print business is one that's was sort of more in my veins. And 20 years ago, I think if I was to launch a business now, I'd certainly tread carefully if I was going to do a print one, especially given what's happened recently. But that said, if you spot an opportunity and there's the nucleus of a market there that you can work with, then there's still chances to launch and to help coalesce a market.
I think you once said you have an insatiable appetite for launch and experimentation. Perhaps, as you said, that was back in the early days. But how has the Anthem portfolio evolved since those early days?
Yeah, I do try and get the people I work with to stop me from doing launches and silly experiments. But yeah, over time so our first magazine was Music Tech, which was back in 2003 or 2, and then the second one was Italia. So there was no synergy or anything there, but our thinking was that we wanted to have feet in two camps. We didn't want to be beholden just to one market. So while it may have made it difficult to scale up, over time, that sort of spread of portfolio has stood us in quite good stead in terms of resilience. so from Music Tech and Italia, there were sort of various key moments. We bought Guitar magazine from IPC probably about 8-10 years ago now, and that was a real pivotal moment for us because it brought a solid profitability into the business and also created that nucleus of a portfolio for the music titles, and then led to other titles like vintage rock and classic pop. And then from Italia, we sort of moved into food titles. So we had an Italian cookery title at one point, Taste Italia, and that taught us how to publish food magazines without having our own kitchens and our own food styling. And it enabled us to become prominent food magazine publishers in a more economical way than we thought we had to. So those were sort of key moments, just moving into food, buying guitar, and then probably just subsequently over the years, we've experimented with other things and flexed and come back. But I guess our most recent strategic thing was buying Women's Running, which again helped with that movement towards a sort of health and wellbeing company that we're now operating as.
And Women's Running recently won Lifestyle Magazine of the Year at the ACE Newspaper and Magazine Awards. Can you tell us a bit more about that magazine and what you've done with it?
So Women's Running was a title that Wild Bunch Media had published for about 6 or 7 years, maybe a bit longer, and they themselves had won awards, but they were never able to sort of take it beyond the single title. So I think they had a sort of structure that was based around one magazine. So we were able to inherit and buy a brilliant magazine that had been superbly marketed, but wasn't quite right for the company at that time, for their company. But over our time, we relaunched it 18 months ago now, and really putting the reader, the female runners right at the core. And we've got a fantastic editor in Esther who just lives and breathes the mission of getting more women running. And it sounds simple, and I guess it's what everyone tries to do with their magazines. But that title it really does live and breathe its mission. And we've got podcasts now. The website is growing rapidly, and I think there's just a real personal connection between the magazine and the readers, which we haven't necessarily always had with some of our titles, where perhaps we've had magazine experts publishing magazines, but who weren't necessarily passionate or devotees of the subject. So it's been an ongoing debate, but I think in Women's Running we've found an editor and a title and a brand that are just hand in glove, made for each other.
And your current portfolio is spread over food, well-being and music. How would you summarise the potential for growth in each of those areas?
Yeah, and I would say that we're very much focused on food and well-being. We sold some our sort of core music making titles a couple of years ago, which are Music Tech and Guitar magazine. And at the time that there was a sort of question about, well, where does that leave you with the music titles? And effectively, we decided that we weren't going to sell them for the sake of it, and it wasn't a compelling moment to do that. So we've kept them as a sort of profitable part of the business that we absolutely love. My Classic Pop is my favourite magazine. I don't think that's any secret among my staff. So it's a little bit of a sort of labour of love with those titles, but they are really profitable, and they're something that we're really proud of. But in the meantime, our strategic focus is on health and well-being, and that's where we've launched new websites over the last year, where we experiment with things like podcasts and training courses and the like. So we're very much focused on health and well-being.
And you've said you want to build a health and wellbeing media company, which is much more than just print magazines. And also Anthem is now a digital first company, I believe. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think perhaps probably truer to say we're aspiring to be a digital first company. I think everyone has to go, and we've just seen with the pandemic, we have to move away from reliance on the newsstand. The newsstand is a brilliant place, and like I said, that's where I cut my teeth and where my heart is. But we've seen that you have to have more strings to your bow. But also, more importantly, if we want to influence people's lives, if we actually want to do good with the magazines that we publish or the brands that we publish, realistically, you do that digitally. You don't do it by selling 5, 10, 15,000 magazines. It's by reaching 50, 100, 200,000 people digitally. So I think in terms of helping people lead healthier lives, we have to embrace the digital world. And so yeah, it takes time through learning, and also just reorientating people's mindsets. But I think, again, with the pandemic, that we've really accelerated our approach to interacting with our readers in that way. Which
brings up the question, how do you then monetize that? How do you make that digital offering pay?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I know I was at a PPA conference maybe a year ago, and there's a chap saying you cannot make money through media sales, and you have to sell access, and you have to sell to your consumers, not to advertisers. And I'm not convinced of that. I think again, the lockdown and the pandemic is sort of in sharp focus at the moment, and as everything sort of closed down rapidly, we thought, oh god, advertising is going to be the first thing to go. But actually, partly because of the topics that we're involved in veganism and running, these are actually things that people could still embrace during lockdown, and our advertisers want to reach those people. And it's not about selling banners or just inventory at the lowest price through networks. It's about relationships and close collaborations with those advertisers that are much more than just the old sell something and move on.
Yeah, as you say, you're perfectly placed for the new normal, in which health and well-being is at the forefront of all of our minds. You recently announced a restructure. Can you tell us a bit more about that and why it was necessary and what it means for Anthem?
Yeah, so when the lockdown happened in sort of late March, we already, in the space of 3 weeks, we had 3 versions of our company in response to what was going on. And after about, I guess, 4 weeks, we could see that Smith's just completely shut. There were parts of our business that couldn't exist without Smith's. So that was an interesting thing, and it was something that we'd been conscious of, but then had to face the reality of. So we suspended probably 6 of our titles, I think. And as we've eased towards coming out of lockdown, we've been able to assess the ones that we think can now emerge from that. And throughout the lockdown, we were still publishing all our core health and wellbeing titles, so that still continued. But there were other titles that were perhaps a little bit more marginal anyway, and we hoped to be able to invest our way through to a sort of a longer term future. But given the way the world is now, we've obviously had to sort of choose where we can focus and where we can safely focus, I suppose. So we've sold a title, Food Heaven, to Warners, where I think it's a great home for that title. But we've also had to announce the closure of a couple of titles, Gluten Free Heaven and Long Live Vinyl, which has been a lovely magazine, but it really is one of those titles that is very specialist and very dependent on specialist retail. And sadly, we just didn't have the time to build up subscription base for that title to be sustainable in the long term. But yeah, so I think with the narrower focus now, some of our titles come back as bi-monthly as well, to sort of give them more room to sell, I suppose. But we're very much focused on our major brands of Women's Running, Vegan Food and Living, Colouring Heaven, all in that health and wellbeing sector, and all where they have really dominant positions in their markets and where they can actually affect and reach the most people.
Yeah. You run video training courses on the one hand and live events on the other, and presumably those have both been affected, perhaps in different ways, by lockdown. How have they fared in lockdown, and do you think live events will come back?
Yeah, so we launched some video training courses last year, and that was a steep learning curve, but created something that was really strong. But we de-emphasized it, I'd say, towards around the turn of the year. But interestingly, as you've sort of suggested, during lockdown, we were able to remarket that. Our marketing team, who also won an award recently for the subscription team of the year at the NMAs, they were heroes of our early lockdown in that they were able to exploit all our opportunities to sell things direct to our consumers and our readers. So the training courses being among them. So we sort of just relaunched them basically, at a sort of more accessible price, and suddenly we had a new revenue stream that just came back on board. With live events, we had a 3-year go at live events, and probably the most successful ones were music events that actually went when we sold Guitar magazine. Right. So we were left. We did a Bare Fashion, which was a vegan fashion show, which was a wonderful event, but we were struggling to make money with it. And then as the lockdown came, it just sort of spelt the end with us. So we sold the brand to one of the people who was involved with it. And, I think they'll probably evolve it as a digital brand. But for now, I think we're away from live events as we'd all expect them to be. Although, I do think some of the live digital events that are happening are actually much better than I expected. So we've got something in colouring that we could bring back as a live digital event. So that might see us return in that way, but not necessarily in a room full of people.
Right. So what do you think are the key tenets of a successful modern publishing strategy, and how has that changed in the light of recent events?
I think the absolute core of what we've been trying to do over the last 18 months is get closer relationships with our readers. And it's so, as well as understanding them, it's literally being able to talk to them. I think it's just at the core of everything we have to do now. When you can't rely on retail, and you can't actually rely on social media, just having that direct relationship of emails and subscription is axiomatic to everything I think the publishers have to do now. So that's our top priority.
And how do you see the consumer magazine market evolving over the next 5 years?
I think it will continue to be robust. I think we've seen with Colour in Heaven, for instance, we sold more magazines than we have done for 5 years during the lockdown. So I think people still have passion for magazines if they catch the moment right, and Women's Running is selling more than it was a year ago. So, I think there's still an appetite for titles. I think that there's going to be obviously constant evolution in terms of frequency, maybe, and also where you buy them and how you buy them. But I think that the future is still strong for magazines, but you just can't rest on any laurels with publishing, least of all this year. But for every year since we launched, we've had to be sort of reinventing ourselves the whole way along. So 5 years' time, it's for the brave and the bold, I'd say.
And where next for Anthem Publishing? What's in the pipeline for you?
So we have just done this restructure. So really sadly, we've had to lose both brands and people. But what we have done is narrowed down our focus, and those 3 brands I talked about earlier on, Vegan Food and Living, Colour in Heaven, and Women's Running. That's where all our major effort is at the moment. So for vegan, it's to have the UK's biggest vegan website, and we're not far off that. And I think that's the big thing for that title. And Women's Running, I think we'll see a greater evolution from the podcast that we've got, and I hope to see that there's a maybe more frequent podcasts or a variety of them, or more of maybe more video. So I think there's a lot that can be done with Women's Running. In terms of visions of what you remember of lockdown, one of them is people running all the time, and mostly women, as far as I can see. So I think there's massive opportunity with that title in particular.
And what about you personally? I believe you always take your lunch break. You don't respond to emails at weekends. How important is it to you to establish a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, you have to check in with my wife. I definitely do take lunch breaks. I think it's vital to get away from your desk. I mean, it's especially now when I'm sat in a back bedroom, looking out a nice window. But you have to take breaks, and you have to give yourself time, not thinking about emails and computers and all that sort of stuff. I don't have email on my phone, and even now, actually, Simon, who's my sort of partner in running the business, he'll email me and he'll say the next day, "You've seen your email?" I said, "No, I haven't. I don't look at it. You should know this by now." So I do think it's really important to have that demarcation between your sort of personal life and your work life.
And you're a director of Bath City Football Club. How did that come about, and how involved are you with that?
Yeah, that's probably the one that breaks my rules. But Kath says, I'm working, and I said, no, that's my hobby. So yeah, I do find myself that's the one which blurs the lines, I think. But Bath City, they were in a bit of a sort of crisis a few years back, 5 years maybe, and we're trying to raise money to buy it as a community-owned club, and I helped out with that, sort of half knowing that I was what I was letting myself in for, and I've become, I'm a director there, and I'm fully involved, and it's so satisfying. We've increased the crowds there, we've increased the revenues by something like 70% or something. So it's really pleasing to bring the sort of commercial experience that I've got to bear on something that I love, and also just seeing the impact that we can have with the club in terms of people being excited and happy, but also we have a foundation that does coaching for kids in schools and that sort of thing. So it really embodies what we're trying to do with Anthem, just make people a bit happier, a bit healthier. That's our aims with both of the businesses I'm involved with now.
Brilliant. And finally, you're obviously a big football fan. If you were in charge of English football, what 3 changes would you make to put England in a better position to win the World Cup?
3 changes. I would not allow people to foul Harry Kane. I would probably ensure they have a month off before the next World Cup. And I don't know, if I knew, I would be badgering the FA. I think Southgate's done a brilliant job in bringing in youth and giving everyone their head, but maybe he needs to just settle on his team. So I'll tell him just to settle down and not just constantly bring new players in. Great.
Well, Jon, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast today.
Okay, thanks very much.
A big thank you again to Acorn Web Offset for sponsoring this podcast. If you're looking for a new magazine printer, then check out their website at acornweb.co.uk or contact Matt Carey on 07714 299 105 or by email at matthew.carey@acornweb.co.uk. Thank you to Jon for being our guest this week. You can find out more about Anthem's food, wellbeing and music brands at anthem.co.uk. You can also follow them on Twitter, where their handle is @AnthemUK. If you would like to know more about In Publishing, then check out our website, inpublishing.co.uk, where you can also register to receive our magazine and newsletter. Thank you for listening, and please join me next week on the In Publishing podcast.